Welcome to Style Lesson 12. My name is Chad, and in this lesson I will illustrate the ethics of style by walking you through Joseph Williams' analysis of the Declaration of Independence. As mentioned in the previous style lesson, Joseph Williams' general rule that governs the ethics of style is what he calls the first principle of ethical writing. That is, write to others as you would have others write to you. Thus, we are ethical writers when we would willingly put ourselves in the place of our readers and experience what they do as they read what we've written. The degree to which writers adhere to this principle affects not only the reader's reception of their writing, but also the reader's perception of them as moral agents. With this first principle in mind, let's unpack Williams' analysis of the style found in the Declaration of Independence, noting what Williams concludes about Thomas Jefferson through Jefferson's choice of style. Before we do this, note that learning the ethics of style not only benefits writers by enabling them to communicate with greater force and clarity, but also benefits readers by enabling them to analyze the writing they encounter. Shrewd readers learn the ethics of style so that they can detect style choices which subtly manipulate unaware readers. Analyzing style choices often reveals the implicit philosophies and worldviews of writers which commonly go unnoticed in casual reading. What is the logic of Jefferson's case? Williams notes first that Jefferson's entire case for independence hinges on a simple conditional syllogism. That is a pattern of logical reasoning that follows this structure. If A is true, then B is true. A is true, therefore B must be true. Note how Jefferson styles the flow of his document with this kind of syllogistic logic to create global coherence. Major premise. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Minor premise. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. Conclusion. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. Do you sense the flow of the logic? If there is gross abuse of power, then there should be revolution. There is gross abuse of power, therefore we intend a revolution. Notice that by simply styling his case logically as a syllogism, Jefferson ensures the coherence of the entire document and sets up this argument as a formidable case of progressive logic. So beyond the logic of the document, what parts of the sentence does Williams analyze in Thomas Jefferson's Declaration? The bulk of Williams' analysis centers on the characters and actions of Jefferson's sentences. Williams observes that in Part 2, which is the minor premise of the Declaration, Jefferson piles a substantial case against the king by making him the character who functions as the subject of the sentences, making King George the doer of the action. He has refused, he has forbidden, he has refused, he has called together, he has dissolved. Notice how Jefferson places responsibility on the tyrant king by making him the subject and doer of the action in each sentence. Note also that these sentences are in active voice with clear concrete verbs describing the king's tyrannous actions. He has erected, he has kept, he has effected, he has combined, he has abdicated, he has plundered. Williams' point is that Jefferson could have written these sentences differently, making them passive or placing the colonists in the subject position. But because he made the king the doer of all these concrete actions, then the weight of all these sentences shows that King George was an oppressive king. Jefferson uses the character in the subject position to lay responsibility on the king and uses concrete actions to identify the willful evils the king perpetrated against the colonists. Had he written, "We colonists have been forbidden to pass laws," King George wouldn't have borne the brunt of the responsibility or been seen as the active agent of various atrocities. Williams also observes that in Part 3, which is the conclusion of the argument, Jefferson uses characters and subjects to build his case. Notice how Jefferson makes the colonists the subjects of these sentences as the characters who are the doers of the action. We have warned, we have reminded, we have appealed, we have conjured, we must therefore acquiesce, we do solemnly publish and declare, and we mutually pledge to each other our lives. Notice how Jefferson identifies the colonists as dutiful citizens, making them the clear agent of various noble actions. Actions like warning and reminding and appealing show that the colonists have actively done their due diligence and are not taking the decision lightly to break away from the crown. William's point is that Jefferson could have written these sentences differently, making them passive or placing the British people in the subject position. If Jefferson had written, "The British people have been warned or reminded," this style choice would not have identified the colonists as the noble, benevolent citizens he wanted to show them to be. Williams lastly observes that in Part 1, which is the major premise of the argument, Jefferson replaces clear and concrete characters and subjects with abstractions and nominalizations, what Williams terms indirect and impersonal language. Note how Jefferson makes abstractions the characters in these sentences, removing the agency from the colonist in Part 1. It becomes necessary for the colonist. Laws of nature and of nature's God entitle the colonist. Respect to the opinions of mankind requires the colonist. Causes which impel the colonist to the separation. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that the colonist not change government lightly. Experience has shown the colonist. Necessity which constrains the colonist. Notice how Jefferson uses style to argue that the colonists are obliged to respond in a certain way because external forces, namely experience and prudence and other abstractions, are forcing them to. In Part 1 of the Declaration, the colonists are not the primary characters or doers of the action. Instead, they are acted upon, removing their choice and showing that they had to, by sheer necessity, seek their independence. As Williams writes, what is most striking about the style of Part 1 is not just its impersonal generality, but how relentlessly Jefferson uses that style to strip the colonists of any free will of their own and to invest agency in higher forces that coerce the colonists to act. Again, Jefferson cleverly adapts his style to his argument, allowing the characters and subjects of his sentences to help him make the argument for independence. Notice that no matter how true you may find these statements to be, Jefferson has manipulated the style of these sentences to support his overall argument that the king has acted like a tyrant, and the colonists have remained dutiful citizens who now dutifully feel compelled to break away from the crown. Jefferson could have done otherwise. Williams writes that Jefferson was not forced by the nature of things to make King George the active agent of every oppressive action, but that choice supported his argument that the king was a willfully abusive tyrant. Such a choice seems so natural, however, that we don't notice that it was a choice. But readers who have learned to analyze the ethics of style in a written text will be aware of Jefferson's choices and will have to decide if Jefferson acted ethically. Was Jefferson right to manipulate his style to reinforce his argument? Does the end justify the means? Are Jefferson's style choices warranted? Americans may often feel like Jefferson's declaration bears the force of self-evident truths, yet even Jefferson apparently thought his argument could be strengthened by a series of strategic style choices. So what are we to think? Were Jefferson's style choices warranted? Were they ethical? Do readers find themselves compelled to agree with Jefferson because of the truthfulness of all his claims, or, at least in part, because of the power of his style, which recommends his thesis implicitly? The answers to these questions are for you to decide, but in the end, Williams reminds us that the basis for our ethical evaluation of Jefferson, or any other writer, should be our first principle of ethical writing, which we discussed at the beginning of the lesson. We are ethical writers when we would willingly put ourselves in the place of our readers and experience what they do as they read what we've written. At the end of a style analysis such as this one, we are left with the wisdom of a biblical proverb to guide us in our value judgments and make us more ethical readers and writers. Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. It is a worthy command, not only because it makes us more judicious readers and writers, but also because the one who gave us the command was willing to die to show us its power. So seek to master the ethics of style and keep writing, and we will see you next time.